All right, chapter 2, the first of the three spirits. When Scrooge awoke, it was so dark, he wasn't sure what hour it was. He listened for the church bell. He was astonished when it went from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, 7 to 8, up to 12. 12. It was past 2 when he went to bed. The clock was wrong. An icicle must have gotten into the cranks. It was wrong. 12? Why, it isn't possible, said Scrooge. Could I have slept through a whole day and into another night? Could something have happened to the sun? Could this be 12 noon? The idea alarmed him. He scrambled out of bed and ran to the window. He rubbed off the frost with his sleeve. Even then, he could see very little. It was cold and dark out there. No noise of people running about was heard. It surely must be night. Night. Scrooge went to bed again. Although he thought and thought, he could make no sense of it. The more he thought, the more perplexed he was. So perplexed is like you're very confused. The more he tried not to think, the more he thought. Marley's ghost bothered him a great deal. Every time he convinced himself that it was all a dream, his mind questioned him. Scrooge lay thinking of this when the clock struck 3/4 more. He suddenly remembered that the ghost had warned him of a visitation when the clock struck 1. He resolved to stay awake until the hour passed. Those next 15 minutes were long, so long that he tried to convince himself that he dozed off and missed the clock. Finally, he heard it. Ding dong. 1/4 past, said Scrooge, counting. Ding dong. 1/2 past, said Scrooge. Ding dong. 1/4 to it, said Scrooge. Ding dong. The hour itself, said Scrooge triumphantly. Nothing else. He spoke too soon. As the hour bell rang, lights flashed upon the room. The curtains were drawn. Those curtains, I tell you, were drawn aside by a hand. A hand. Scrooge found himself face to face with an unearthly visitor. He was as close to him as I am now to you. It was a strange figure, like a child, yet like an old man as well. Its proportions were that of a child's. Its hair, which hung down its back, was white, like an old man's. Yet the face had no wrinkles. The arms were long and muscular. The hands the same. The legs were strong as well. It wore a white tunic and was bound by a belt. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand. In contrast to the wintry seeds, its dress was trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that its head was crowned by a bright, clear jet of light. It held a cap under its arm. Then Scrooge noticed its body parts. They vanished before coming back to focus. One leg would vanish, and 20 more would come in its place. Then a pair of legs with no head. Then just a head with no body. It was all so odd, quite strange. "Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me?" asked Scrooge. "I am," said the spirit with a voice that was soft and gentle. "Who and what are you?" Scrooge demanded. "I am the ghost of Christmas past." "Long past?" asked Scrooge. He noticed his short height. "No, your past." Scrooge begged the ghost to put his cap over his bright, illuminated head. "What?" yelled the ghost. "Why would you put out the light I give? It is not enough that you are one of those who forced me to wear it low on my brow for years." Scrooge claimed he never meant for anyone to cover his brow. Then he boldly asked what business brought him here. "Your welfare brought me here," said the ghost. It put out its strong hand and clasped Scrooge gently by the arm. "Rise and walk with me." Scrooge could have protested. He could have said that his bed was warm, or he was wearing only slippers on his feet, just a dressing gown and a nightcap for clothes. He could have said that the temperature was far too cold. But He found the spirit's clasp was not to be resisted. The spirit made its way to the window. I am immortal, said Scrooge. I will fall. The spirit put its hand on Scrooge's heart. My hand will uphold you. As the words were spoken, Scrooge and the spirit passed through the wall. They stood on an open country road. The city had disappeared. The darkness and mist disappeared along with it. Now it was a clear, cold, wintry day. Snow was heaped upon the ground. Good heavens, said Scrooge, clasping his hands together. I was born in this place. I was a boy here. Scrooge became aware of 1,000 odors in the air, each one connected with 1,000 thoughts, hopes, joys, and cares long forgotten. Your lip is trembling, said the ghost. And what is that upon your cheek? Scrooge muttered with an unusual cracking in his voice. A pimple. He then begged the ghost to lead him. You remember the way? Asked the spirit. Remember it? Cried Scrooge. I could walk it blindfolded. Strange that you have forgotten it for so many years, observed the ghost. Let's go on. They walked along the road. Scrooge recognized every gate, post, and tree. Finally, a little market town appeared in the distance. He could see the bridge, the winding river, and ponies trotting toward them. Boys rode upon their backs. The boys laughed and shouted to each other. The air was filled with their merry music. These are shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. They have no awareness that we're here. The boys rode by. As they did, Scrooge could name each one. Why was he happy beyond anything to see each one? Why did his cold eyes glisten and his heart leap up as they passed? Why was he filled with gladness when he heard them wish each other Merry Christmas? What was a Merry Christmas to Scrooge? What good had it ever done him? The school is not deserted, said the ghost. A child, neglected by his friends, is left inside. Scrooge said he knew it. He sobbed. They soon approached a mansion of dull red brick. A weathered cupola on the roof supported a bell hanging from it. It was a large, damp house. The windows were broken. The gates decayed. Chickens clucked in the stables. The sheds and coach houses were overrun with grasses. Once inside, the rooms were nearly empty. There was a chill in the place. Scrooge and the ghost went across the hall to a door at the back of the house. It opened before them and showed a row of desks. At one, a lonely boy was reading near a feeble fire. Scrooge sat down near him and wept to see his poor, forgotten self as he used to be. Without an echo in the house or a noise outside, the silence fell upon Scrooge with such sadness. His tears flowed freely. The spirit touched him on the arm. He pointed to his younger self, who was intent upon his reading. Suddenly, a man in foreign garments stood outside the window. Why, it's Ali Baba, Scrooge exclaimed in ecstasy. Yes, I know. When this child was left here all alone, many of his book friends appeared. Young Scrooge spoke excitedly about Robinson Crusoe and his parrot, kings, princesses. Look, there goes Friday running for his life to the little creek. With pity, Scrooge looked at his former self. Poor boy, he cried again. I wish, muttered Scrooge. He didn't finish his thought. He put his hand in his pocket and looked about him. He rubbed his eyes dry. It's too late now. What troubles you? Asked the spirit. Nothing, said Scrooge, nothing. There was a boy singing a Christmas carol at my door last night. I would have liked to give him something, that's all. The ghost smiled thoughtfully. He waved his hand. Let's see another Christmas. Scrooge's former self grew larger at the words. The room became a little darker and a little dirtier. The panels shrunk. The windows cracked. Fragments of plaster fell out of the ceiling. How this was brought on, Scrooge knew no more than you do. He only knew that it was quite correct. Everything had happened and looked like it had many years before. There he was alone again, and when all the other boys traveled home for the jolly holidays. He was not reading now. Instead, he was pacing up and down the floor. Scrooge looked at the ghost and mournfully shook his head. He glanced anxiously toward the door. It opened. A little girl, much younger than the boy, darted in. She threw her arms around his neck and called him her dear, dear brother. I have come to bring you home, dear brother, said the child. She clapped her tiny hands. To bring you home. Home, little Fan? Asked the boy. Yes, said the child. Home for good. Home forever and ever. Father is so much kinder now. Home is like heaven. He spoke to me so gently one night, so gently that I wasn't afraid to ask him if you might come home. He said yes. He sent me in a coach to bring you home. We're going to have the merriest time in all the world. You are quite a woman, little Fan, said the boy. She clapped her hands and laughed. Then she dragged him toward the door. A terrible voice cried out in the hall, Bring down Master Scrooge's box. It was the schoolmaster. He glared at Scrooge, but Fanny bid him a quick goodbye. They were off at last. Always so delicate a creature, said the ghost, but she had a large heart. So she had, cried Scrooge. You're right, a huge heart. She died a woman, but she had children, I believe. One child, said Scrooge. True, said the ghost. Your nephew. Scrooge seemed uneasy. He answered softly, Yes. Although they had just left the school a minute before, they were now in a busy street. It was easy to see by the store windows that it was Christmas time again. It was evening. All the shops were lit up. The ghost stopped at a certain warehouse door. Do you know where we are? Know it, said Scrooge. I was apprenticed here. They went in. At the sight of an old gentleman in a wig, Scrooge cried out in great excitement. Remember how we talked about how a long time ago men wore wigs, especially those white ones? So you can kind of think about that time period. Why, it's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart. It's Fezziwig alive again. Old Fezziwig laid down his pen. He looked at the clock. He rubbed his hands and called out, Yo-ho there, Ebenezer, Dick. Scrooge's former self, now a grown young man, came in, followed by his fellow apprentice. Oh, sorry. Dick Wilkins, said Scrooge to the ghost. Bless him. Yes, that's him. He was quite attached to me, poor Dick. Dear poor Dick. My boys, said Fezziwig, no more work tonight. It's Christmas Eve. Let's put the shutters up. You wouldn't believe how fast those shutters went up. Once finished, Fezziwig shouted, Let's clear the way, my lads. Within a minute, every movable was packed off. The floor was swept. Fuel was heaped upon the fire. The warehouse was snug and warm. Within an instant, it was turned into a ballroom. The fiddler arrived with his music book. Then Mrs. Fezziwig came in. Her smile glowed. The door opened to find servants, housemaids, cousins, and bakers all joining in the party. What a festive evening it was! There was dancing. Everyone shared the finest mince pies and cold roasts. When the clock struck 11, the ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took to their stations at either side of the door. As each person left, they shook hands and wished each guest the merriest of Christmases. When everyone retired but the two apprentices, they did the same to them. When their cheery voices faded, the lads were left to their beds under the counter in the shop. During the whole scene, Scrooge acted like a man out of his wits. His heart and soul soared in the scene with his former self. He remembered everything. He enjoyed everything. It wasn't until he could no longer see his former self in Dick that he remembered the ghost. When he looked at it, the light upon its head burned clearer. A small matter, said the ghost, to make these silly fools so full of gratitude. Small, said Scrooge. The spirit signed to him to listen to the two apprentices. They were pouring out their hearts in praise of Fezziwig. The ghost questioned Scrooge. Fezziwig spent but a few pounds of your mortal money, 3 or 4 perhaps. Is it that much that he deserves this praise? It isn't that, said Scrooge, angry at the remark. He sounded more like his former self, not his later self. It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to make us happy or unhappy. He can make our hearts light or heavy. Say that his power lies in words and looks. The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it costs a fortune. He felt the spirit's glance and stopped. What's the matter? Asked the ghost. Nothing particular, said Scrooge. Something, I think. No, said Scrooge. No, not really. I just wish I could say a word or two to my clerk just now. That's all. His former self turned down the lamps. Scrooge and the ghost once again stood side by side in the open air. My time grows short, said the spirit. Those words produced an immediate effect, for again Scrooge saw himself. He was older now, a man in the prime of his life. His face didn't yet show the years of wrinkles it carried now. He was not alone. By his side, a young woman was crying. It matters little, she said softly. To you, very little. You fear the world too much. You crave money too much. It's too important to you. I'm not changed towards you, said the man. She shook her head. Are you not? Our contract was an old one when we were content with what we had. When it was made, you were another man. I was just a boy, he said impatiently. I can't stay with you. I can't marry you. You are too changed, too concerned with worldly things. She turned to walk away. May you be happy in the life you have chosen. Scrooge remembered all too well the sadness he felt that day. Spirit, take me away from this. Show me no more. Why do you delight in torturing me? One shadow more, said the ghost. No more, cried Scrooge. No more. I do not wish to see any more. But the ghost insisted. Soon they were in another place, a room. It was not very large or handsome, but it was full of comfort. Near to the fire sat a beautiful young girl. Scrooge believed it to be the same girl he was to marry. Then he saw the woman seated across from her. Now she was a comely matron. The noise was high, for there were 3 children in the room. No one seemed to care about the noise. Contrary, the mother and daughter seemed to enjoy it. A knocking at the door was heard. Their father stood before them. His hands were full of presents. The shouts of wonder and delight rang out with each present opened. When it became quieter, the father sat down with the daughter and mother. Belle, said the husband with a smile, I saw an old friend of yours today. They both laughed at the same time and shouted, Scrooge. Mr. Scrooge it was, said the husband. I passed his office window. He had a candle burning. I could hardly help seeing him. His partner lies near death, yet he sits alone there, quite alone in the world, I do believe. Spirit, said Scrooge in a broken voice, remove me from this place. I told you these were shadows of the things that have been, said the ghost. They are what they are. Do not blame me. Remove me, said Scrooge once more. I cannot bear it. Not another second can I take. He turned upon the ghost. Leave me. Take me back. Haunt me no longer. Scrooge observed that his light was burning extra bright. He felt it was in some way influencing him. He seized the cap and pressed it down upon the spirit's head. The spirit dropped beneath it so that the cap covered its whole form. No matter how hard Scrooge pressed it down, it could not hide the light that streamed from under it. Scrooge was aware of feeling exhausted. He saw he was back in his own bedroom. He gave the cap one last parting squeeze. Finally, his hand relaxed. He fell into bed and sank into a heavy sleep. Okay, so your assignment today is going to be on the Google Classroom about Chapter 2.
Wait, Miss Walker, the next chapter was on the next page.
Yes, the next chapter will be on the next page if you keep going. Chapter 3, which we'll read tomorrow, the second of the 3 spirits. So the first spirit that we have heard about was the one who took Scrooge to the past. And you notice that he took Scrooge to several different places in the past, right? Okay.
Moments.
So we're going to talk about that a little bit. It's going to go into your assignment for today, okay? So I want to show it to you, and then we're going to kind of discuss that chapter a little bit together before you get started, okay? All right, so if you go to your slides, A Christmas Carol reading responses, and you go down to chapter 2, there's one question, okay? says, I want you to name one place that the first spirit takes Scrooge. Notice he took them a few different places. Okay, so you're just going to pick one. And I want you to tell me, why do you think he took him to that place? What was the point of the spirit taking Scrooge there? Okay, so let's talk about that for just a second. Okay, I'm going to stop my recording here. And I want for somebody to name